the Europeans have so much to lose from continuing the war against Russia. And again, we already rolled the dice. It went wrong. Why are we doubling down when there's no pathway to victory? It's I always make the point. I very much understand what the Americans are doing. They went for efforts to weaken a strategic rival. It didn't work. You pull away and hand it over to the Europeans. I can understand the Ukrainians. They're fighting an existential war. I understand the Russians. They're also fighting an existential war. But the Europeans, how are they the most stubborn ones? This is very perplexing to me, though.
Well, I don't think the Europeans are the most stubborn. I mean, the Ukrainians are incredibly stubborn. You might make the argument, as you were alluding to, that the Ukrainians face an existential threat and the Europeans don't. So you might be able to explain the Ukrainians' stubbornness, but not the Europeans. But what's going on here, Glenn, to get back to a point I made a few minutes ago, is that once the Istanbul negotiations collapsed and this war escalated, and once it went on for 4 years, as it has, it just becomes extremely difficult, and I'm choosing my words carefully here. It becomes extremely difficult for the Europeans or the Ukrainians or the Russians to cut a deal. Just take it from the Russians' point of view. The Russians understand that the West and Ukraine represent a mortal threat. If you just look at what's happened over the past 4 years, as you know well, the Ukrainians, with permission from the United States and from Britain, invaded Mother Russia. They invaded Mother Russia from Ukraine. Furthermore, they launched missiles at one leg of the strategic nuclear triad that the Russians have, right? These are really momentous events. Furthermore, the West has made it manifestly clear that it wants to defeat Russia in Ukraine. And with that defeat, coupled with sanctions, it wants to bring the Russians to their knees and knock them out of the ranks of the great powers. This is our goal. We've made this manifestly clear. This is why we told the Ukrainians to walk away from Istanbul. We thought we could deliver a hammer blow to Russia. That's why we told the Ukrainians to walk. This is what the Russians are up against. And the United States is an incredibly powerful and ruthless country run by Donald Trump. So if you're the Russians, you have a very powerful incentive to get all you can in terms of Ukrainian territory, to solidify yourself for a future conflict, and furthermore, to make sure that Ukraine is wrecked so that it doesn't present much of a threat to you, and furthermore, is not in a position to join either NATO or the EU. This is the Russian incentive structure at this point in time, and it's a result of all the escalation that's taken place since Istanbul. Then you go to the other side. You can understand, as we talked about before, from a Ukrainian point of view, why they don't want to lose 4 oblasts plus Crimea forever. You can understand why they don't want to be disarmed to the point where they really can't defend themselves against the Russians. You can understand why they want to join NATO or want to have security guarantees and don't want to be told they can't have those things. You can understand that. So the Ukrainians are intransigent. And then you have the Europeans, and this, of course, is of great interest to you. But what I would say to you, Glenn, is that the Europeans have gotten themselves deeply involved in this war. Again, they're not dying on the battlefield. They're not pulling triggers. But the Europeans have been in this war since it started. And it would be a tremendous blow to Europe if they lose the war. And it would be a tremendous blow to NATO if they lose the war. And again, NATO means the American commitment to Europe. If this war led to the disintegration of NATO, you're basically saying that would mean the end of the American pacifier in Europe. The Europeans don't want that. They want to win this war. They want this to be a great victory for NATO, or at least a stalemate that they can then dress up as something of a victory, so that, NATO feels good, the Americans stay in Europe, and so forth and so on. So the Europeans are profoundly committed to this war. That leaves the Americans. Trump and Vance are, I think, basically in agreement with you and me. I mean, I think they understand this conflict in ways that are very similar to the ways that you and I understand it. But I don't want to say they're lone wolves, but I would say there are not many people in the American national security establishment who share their views. Congress is just filled with superhawks. Trump has been surrounded by people like Keith Kellogg, Marco Rubio, and assorted other superhawks. So Trump has great difficulty just negotiating his way through the obstacle-filled waters inside the United States, not to mention having to deal with the Ukrainians and the Europeans. And there are limits to what Trump is willing to give up either. He just can't make a deal that gives the Russians everything they want, because that will come back to haunt him in his mind. So he comes up with that original 28-point proposal we talked about, which he thinks the Russians will be happy with, but as I was saying, the Russians will not be happy with. So he can't get out of this mess, right? He's trying. I mean, he's not exactly Machiavelli the second, but he's trying, and he's unable to do it. And the end result is that this one is just going to go on until you get a Russian victory, an ugly victory on the battlefield, and you get some sort of frozen conflict, followed by poisonous political relations between Russia on one side and Ukraine, Europe, and the United States on the other. I think, Glenn, you've heard me say this before. When you think back to that April 2008 decision to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO and what that has led to, and the fact that we have doubled down at every point, especially with regard to Istanbul in April 2022, it's just hard to believe how foolish we have been and how catastrophic those various decisions, of course, starting with the big one in April 2008, have been. I see no end to trouble over this issue for as far as the eye can see. Now, I may be wrong, and let's hope I'm wrong. Let's hope I'm completely wrong, that my analysis is deeply flawed and I'm just missing the obvious. Let's hope that. But I'll tell you, I've thought long and hard about this. I've spent a lot of time talking to people like you, Alexander, and so forth and so on. And I hate to say it, but I think that my analysis, which is so pessimistic, is correct.
Well, sadly, I agree with your analysis as well. So the title of your speech, the bleak future of Europe, I think that's very appropriate. You're painting a very bleak picture indeed. So, well, John, thank you as always. I know everyone wants some of your time, so I appreciate talking to us.
My pleasure, Glenn. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for going back over all these issues again, as depressing as it is.